You need somebody in this office who understands the cyber threat and the threats of misinformation.
I speak for Washingtonians and not a political party.
Voters will decide this fall whether Secretary of State appointee Steve Hobbs should stay on the job or be replaced by Pierce County Auditor Julie Anderson.
I'm the only candidate with experience managing elections.
The two candidates both possess impressive public service credentials.
For democracy to work for all of us, it must include all of us.
But they disagree on who's most qualified for the job.
I worked in a bipartisan manner. I've worked across the aisle.
Which candidate will voters choose?
Politics is a polarizing distraction for the Secretary of State.
The special election to pick Washington's next Secretary of State, coming up on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, appointed to the position in November of 2021, is running against Pierce County Auditor Julie Anderson to keep his job for another 2 years. It's a special election following former Secretary Kim Wyman's decision to step down last year and join the Biden administration. Hobbs was the clear frontrunner in the August primary and has more than doubled his opponent's efforts in fundraising. But Anderson says her experience as an elections official and her status as a nonpartisan candidate could give her an edge this November. And those aren't the only differences between two candidates aiming to get your vote, to be our state's leader on overseeing your vote, and other duties this fall. Secretary of State Steve Hobbs says his track record speaks for itself.
I've spent my whole life in public service.
After 4 terms as a state senator, Hobbs was chosen by Governor Jay Inslee to be Washington's 16th Secretary of State, following the departure of Kim Wyman to the Biden administration last year.
Senator Steve Hobbs will be our new Secretary of State.
Hobbs is Washington's first AAPI Secretary of State, and its only person of color in statewide office. He touts his 30 years of military service, including 2 tours of duty, and his current role as a lieutenant colonel in the Washington State National Guard, as key experiences in his work to respond to cyber attacks and other modern challenges to voting security.
We're dealing with national security threats. We're dealing with misinformation. You saw what happened January 6th, both at D.C. and our own state capitol. We need somebody here who takes that seriously, and I've done it already for a year here, and I did it in the military.
In an 8-candidate primary, Hobbs was the lead vote-getter with about 40% of the vote. He's raised more than $583,000 for his campaign as of early October and is endorsed by the Seattle Times, the Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO, the Stranger newspaper, and the Association of Washington Business.
That's why I'm honored to serve in this office.
If elected, Hobbs would serve for 2 more years before needing to face election again.
There are effects to this that you're not thinking about.
Unlike his opponent, Hobbs does not support a new push to change our statewide voting system, which residents of Seattle, plus Clark and San Juan counties are considering this fall.
Now is not the time to do ranked choice voting.
Hobbs says, at a time when many people are questioning our current voting system, he doesn't want to alienate anyone or possibly confuse people like his mother, an Asian immigrant for whom English is a second language, or his son, who's developmentally disabled.
I just would say to the advocates, pause. We got to think about that. How do you deal with those issues? Let's not disenfranchise anyone, because democracy is too important to disenfranchise people.
Hobbs would be the first Democrat to hold the Secretary of State's office in more than 60 years, but says his history of working across the aisle in Olympia makes him the right person for the job.
I've got Republicans who've endorsed me. I've got labor and business who've endorsed me. Really, it's about the person that's in the office, not about some kind of party label.
For Julie Anderson, it's exactly about that party label.
It's incredibly important, I think, for the Secretary of State to be nonpartisan.
Anderson was elected as a nonpartisan Pierce County Auditor in 2009 and has served as a Tacoma City Council member and YWCA Executive Director prior to that.
I'm Julie Anderson, your nonpartisan choice for Secretary of State.
She says voters are fed up with partisan politics, and she's not taking any donations or endorsements from any political party this fall to prove her point.
By foregoing all of the support and infrastructure that comes with party affiliation, I'm really putting my money where my mouth is. I don't want a political party speaking for me because I speak for Washingtonians and not a political party.
Anderson was second in the August primary, with nearly 13% of the vote. She's raised nearly $273,000 for her campaign as of mid-October and has been endorsed by former state auditor Brian Sontag, former Secretary of State Sam Reed, Brian Ebersole, the former State House Speaker and Tacoma Mayor, and Rob McKenna, former Washington State Attorney General.
I'll improve election security.
Anderson notes that she's the only certified election administrator in this race and touts the work she's done to oversee accurate, transparent elections for public officials of both parties.
Experience matters. It's work that I love because it's work that I know. This is something that I do every day, not something that I'm just dabbling in. I have a lot of passion. I think that's a big distinction. Ranked choice voting is coming to Washington State.
She also differs from her opponent with regard to new options like ranked choice voting.
I support local options and innovations in democracy.
Anderson says she wants the State House to pass a bill it's discussed for 6 years to give local jurisdictions the legal authority and support they need to pursue a different voting system.
Let's pass a local option bill so that my office, the Office of the Secretary of State, can get busy with rulemaking and preparing local communities who decide to do this.
Anderson is well aware she's in an uphill battle for this job.
I'm definitely an underdog.
But this race could be close. 40% of voters in September said they didn't even know how they'd vote for this position. It's a choice between Julie Anderson's platform as a nonpartisan elections administrator and Steve Hobbs' approach as a cyber attack fighter who's already been on the job for a year. As Washington voters select our next Secretary of State. And let's hear a little bit more from the candidates for Secretary of State. Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, thank you for being here. Also, Pierce County Auditor Julie Anderson, thank you as well. They're both running for the position of Secretary of State this fall, and let's get right to it. We had a coin flip before the show. Secretary Hobbs, you will be speaking first. An opening statement, if you would, about a minute.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I'm your current Secretary of State. Born and raised in Washington. My mom came to this country. She didn't know any English. We learned English together watching Sesame Street. But, her hard work gave me the values of public service and love of country. That's inspired me to join the Army at age 17, where I enlisted as a private. 33 years later, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army National Guard, currently serving. Deployed to Kosovo and Iraq, and coincidentally, I didn't know if I was going to be Secretary of State in the future, but I actually took part in the security in Kosovo and Iraq in the elections there, including distribution of the nomination ballot box in Iraq. Also, during that time period, I served in the National Security Agency, graduate of the Department of Defense Information School, and I'm a public affairs officer, uniquely qualified in combating cyber threats and misinformation threats directed at our democracy. Spent 15 years in the state Senate, worked in a bipartisan manner to solve complex issues, reason why I've got endorsements from Republicans, Democrats, newspapers, and the Association of Washington Business and the Washington State Labor Council, who oppose each other quite a bit during session.
Thank you very much for that. Auditor Anderson, an opening statement, if you would. A minute, please.
Hi, my name is Julie Anderson, and I am the nonpartisan candidate for Secretary of State. For the past 12 years, I've served as Pierce County Auditor, leading an award-winning, nationally recognized team, conducting hundreds of elections, streamlining business licensing, and protecting and preserving recorded documents. I'm also a nationally and state-certified election administrator and a state-certified public records officer, all of which has earned me the trust and endorsements of over 40 election professionals in Washington State. I'm also running as a nonpartisan because I believe that politics is a polarizing distraction for the Secretary of State, and it doesn't make sense to me that the umpire at home plate, who's going to be calling balls and strikes, should be wearing one of the team jerseys.
Okay. We're going to get into that issue in just a little bit here, but Secretary Hobbs, I want to take another tack here. Your opponent has also pointed out you were not a county auditor before you were Secretary of State, as our past two Secretaries of State were. How do you respond to her assertion that you don't have the right qualifications for this job?
Oh, certainly. I mean, the office of Secretary of State has changed quite a bit, and it's never been about doing the elections at the ground level. That's what the county auditors do. That's what 39 counties do. Our role is to do certifications, training, provide assistance. And in this day and age now, It's cybersecurity and misinformation. In fact, Secretary of State's office is the only office where Homeland Security approaches the Secretary of State of various states for a security clearance, which I already have. So the office has evolved quite a bit. We don't want another January 6th to happen. And it happened here in Washington State as well, because people have this myths about elections here in the state of Washington, and we're running them here really well.
Okay. Auditor Anderson, I know you've heard this too from your opponent. The job has changed. It's not just an auditor's role, and maybe you don't have the experience that he has in dealing with cyber attacks and other present-day problems for our elections. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'd say I have more experience responding to cyber threats, having 12 years of experience on the job. You know, one thing that we do have in common is that we are not IT security experts. We rely on people that have training and certification and lots of experience to do that. What we do is respond to the threats that they bring to our awareness, and it's what you do responding to zero-day threats, to scans on firewalls, et cetera. And I would say that elections hasn't changed that much. It is still very much a people-centered process, and there are 40 election professionals who agree. They know that experience matters, and that's why they want to see me in this seat.
Okay. Let me follow up with another piece with you, Auditor Anderson, with regard to being a nonpartisan candidate, which is attractive to some voters who are fed up with two-party politics. But let's say you're elected. You go to the legislature, you give them your budget request, for example. Can you truly stay independent at that point, knowing both party caucuses are going to be putting some pressure on you?
Well, sure. I'm going to keep the conversation centered on common values, access to elections, increased security and transparency. And I've got good relationships with legislators on both sides of the aisle. And I'm going to walk into those meetings having prepped and met with them ahead of time. And I'm going to be providing them with evidence and data and experience so that I've got well-crafted proposals, and I'm going to help make sure that the bills that they bring forward don't run into a buzzsaw.
Okay. Secretary Hobbs, let's try to deal with this issue. You've heard your opponent's desire to make this role nonpartisan. If the goal of Secretary of State is to restore voter trust from voters of all political leanings, why run as a Democrat?
Well, you know, there was a motto that we had in our infantry battalion in Kosovo, which was deeds, not words. It's about the person in the position and the deeds that you do. I know I've worked in a bipartisan manner. I've worked across the aisle. I have endorsements by Republicans and Democrats. I've crafted bipartisan budgets. Really, it's about the person in there. You know, we've had partisan office holders in here. The last three were Republicans, and the people trusted them. So I don't think it really matters one way or the other. You know, I'm not going to shy away from the fact I'm a Democrat, that I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-environment, pro-labor. But I'm also not going to hide from the fact that I work across the aisle in a bipartisan manner to get things done.
There was a recent Seattle Times poll that showed 34% of the people questioned, mainly Republicans, but some Democrats, said the 2020 presidential election had some fraud or major fraud. How do you turn the tide on this perception? And please bring up some specific plans. Secretary Hobbs, you first.
Sure, absolutely. It is disconcerting when you see a poll like that, especially with Washingtonians. You know, we've done a really good job, the Secretary of State's office and the Auditor's office, to put out, information about, turning in your ballot, remembering to vote. What we have not done a good job about is talking about the vote process, the life cycle of the ballot. That's what we're doing now. We're working with our 39 county auditors in doing this. We're doing the Vote with Confidence campaign, talking about not just getting out the vote, but letting people know, hey, did you know we check every signature, the county auditors do. Did you know that it is transparent? You can actually go to the county auditor's office, you can go to Auditor Anderson's office and check out the process right there. We haven't done enough of that, and we need to start doing that, because people have doubts about our election simply because they don't know how elections are ran.
Okay. And maybe, Auditor Anderson, I can ask you a similar question here. Talk to us about what you've done in Pierce County over the last couple of years, or maybe something specific in 2020, and what you could bring to this issue of restoring voter trust if you were elected.
Well, I have to tell you that being a nonpartisan election administrator has really helped us in Pierce County. I have great relationships with both political parties who are observers on the floor in our elections division. And we've instituted things like adding hash checks into our logic and accuracy meetings that are observed by both political parties before we begin tabulating ballots, as well as before we certify the election. We've also involved them in expanded auditing and have piloted a risk limiting audit, which is something that I'd like to bring to the state and have all 39 counties testing the same state race on in a unified risk limiting audit that is statistically valid sample size. We've done a ton of stuff with increasing access to elections too that have not been viewed with skepticism or concern by either political party. Yeah. So you can expand access, you can expand integrity and transparency without losing the trust of either political party.
Let me try to expand on that point, though. This idea of restoring voter trust and getting more people to vote. I mean, this is a big deal. 41% of eligible voters in the August primary that you ran and decided to return their ballots, even lower in Pierce County, unfortunately. Yeah. Tell us about some programs you would put in place if you're elected to encourage voter participation. I'm talking about everybody out there, immigrant communities, marginalized communities too.
Yeah. First of all, eliminating barriers so we can facilitate access, and then we'll talk about motivating people.
Okay.
In Pierce County, we have voluntarily translated election materials and ballots into our most prominent languages in Pierce County. Mm-hmm. We've instituted this toll-free hotline that is available year-round, not just during elections, where the person's primary language, they can call a dedicated 1-800 number and speak directly to an election official without being put on hold while we find a translator. Mm-hmm. We've also contracted with all 3 of our library districts so that on Election Day, we have 27 library branches that are extensions of our office. So whether a person forgot to register, they've lost their ballot, those are things that give them an excuse to sit out the election. Instead, they can go to their local library branch, one that they know and love and trust, and get their business done. We're saving 14 miles per voter on average with that. And if we instituted something like that statewide, you're talking about close to 300 branches.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to talk about libraries in a little bit, but maybe I can talk to you, Secretary Hobbs, getting more people to vote, marginalized communities too.
I just talked about the vote with confidence, which was a big deal because the legislature really didn't help out in resources. And so getting that trust from the legislature, getting those resources to put the word out about the election, I think will greatly help in the general election and helping our 39 counties. But the other thing that we're starting to do too is I've stood up in office to do more voter outreach and education. I'm a person of color. I understand these communities. And so we're going to hire people that come from these communities, that know the language, know the culture. I talked to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce at the Tri-Cities to try to team up with these organizations that have direct communication with voters that don't even know that they're voters, right? And giving them the opportunity to not only register to vote, but letting them know about the voting process as well. We're also looking at a mobile game app to inspire young people before they become voting age. And so we're looking at those things to really increase our voter turnout.
Thank you for that. Auditor Anderson, so we have Seattle and 2 counties in our state voting on alternative voting systems this fall. We're also likely going to see another push for ranked choice voting at the state level in this next session with that local options bill, which would give cities or counties the ability to choose a new voting system. You and your opponent have some different opinions on this issue. Tell us what your place is on this, your position.
My position is that I trust voters and I respect communities, and we're running out of time. It is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when ranked choice voting is introduced in Washington state. And yes, a local options bill has been kicking around in the state legislature for 6 years and continues to gain more and more momentum, and 3 jurisdictions will have this question on their ballot. And what my opponent fails to recognize, he says, now is not the time, now is not the time. We are running out of time. First-class cities and charter counties don't need the permission of a local options bill to institute ranked choice voting. We need a leader now who is going to start drafting rules, start doing training, and start educating the public. And that's me, because I trust the voters and I respect communities.
Secretary Hobbs, can you respond to this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. As Secretary of State, I actually have to abide what the choices of local elections, so I can't ignore it. But what my opponent doesn't understand is she doesn't come from these communities of color. right? I'm a son of an Asian immigrant. What concerns me is these naturalized citizens that just became citizens where English is not their first language, and now you're asking them to vote in an alien way that they're not used to. And we don't even have enough resources now for voter guides to all these citizens that are going to vote. I also think about my son, my middle son, who's a child of special needs. He's got developmental disabilities. It's very easy for him to vote in the current election. You just circle in and then that's it. But to teach him how to do ranked choice voting is very difficult to him. So I think about my son, I think about my mom who are in these, and I also think about the misinformation that's happening right now. You're basing it upon an algorithm, right? Right now it's very simple. Whoever has the most votes, and if it's a close race, wins. Yeah. But then you got an algorithm. Look, at this particular time, I don't think it's a good idea based upon what we're seeing out there.
Okay, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, scare tactics is not a good look in the Secretary of State. One of the reasons that I support the Washington State Voting Rights Act is local jurisdictions and communities can't institute new forms of elections that are going to have a negative impact on sensitive populations. And there is no peer-reviewed evidence that, in fact, that ranked choice voting has those negative impacts. So, and also, algorithm is a really fancy word and sounds very complicated, but it basically means how votes are reapportioned in the ranked choice voting process. And there are 50 communities around the United States that have done that very transparently and easy to understood. I also have the technical background and practical experience to know that we can actually have advocates and skeptics in the community rerun the results of ranked choice voting with open source software.
Okay. In the name of fairness, please, yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's fair to say that it's fear tactic. I look at a perspective of the BIPOC community. You don't have that perspective. And I come from that community. And so to say that I've completely dismissed that is just insulting. I grew up in a community like that. I suffered from discrimination, and I saw my mom get attacked because, she didn't speak the language correctly in their mind. So, I respect Auditor Anderson because we're against the big lie, and she runs elections well in her county. But with all due respect, we have to think about the communities of color because they have been disenfranchised for so long.
Okay.
And I am listening to communities of color who are asking actively for ranked choice voting. And
that is not true.
And I trust voters and respect communities.
Okay. I'd like to try to move on to another issue. Thank you for bearing that out here. Specifically, I wanted to talk about some of the other roles of the Secretary of State's office. Supervising state libraries is one of them. They're housed in several state agencies and prisons, state hospitals, too. Secretary Hobbs, I remember meeting up with you a few weeks ago outside the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library here in Seattle. You had some ideas about libraries in our state institutions that I thought was very interesting. Break that down for us. What are you thinking about?
Absolutely. We've got this great asset in our state prisons and our state hospitals. And, it should be more than just checking out books and checking out movies. So we're looking at using the place as a place of therapy so incarcerated folks can gain skills. We're thinking about maybe a work study situation in a podcast. I know they do it in the California penal system called Ear Hustle. We're also, for the very first time that my office is pushed for, is in youth detention facilities where they didn't have this access to a library. So we're very excited about that, and also getting ready for incarcerated folks as they leave the prison to become active members of society, to teach them about voting, and how the process is done.
Auditor Anderson, you also brought up some interesting ideas when I visited with you a few weeks ago about libraries and how they could be used more fully. Some thoughts on this, please?
I think I already gave an example of how we can provide some leadership through the state library program to local library districts and replicate the model that's successful in Pierce County for Election Day support. I think that some of the things that have me most energized are around state archives.
Okay.
And
also supervised by the SOS.
That's absolutely right. What I'm concerned about and excited about is all of the digitally native records that are currently being generated by state and local government, and I'm not sure that everybody is preserving those so that they are indexed, they keep all their metadata, and all of the associated documents. Those are important records for holding government accountable. And I'm a state certified records officer and have some ideas how to do that.
Okay, thank you for breaking those pieces down. I wonder if I could jam in another short question before the closing statement here. A big part of your role will be submitting a budget to the legislature if indeed you're elected. Talk about priorities you set in that budget. Would you be asking for more money? Some thoughts about this, Secretary Hobbs, you first.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'd like to do is provide more funding for the counties. We doubled our cybersecurity. We set up a division dealing with misinformation, but we need to provide more resources for counties, especially for our 39 county auditors that administer the elections in our rural parts of the state. I had mentioned some of the stuff I want to do for our prisons and our hospitals with the libraries there. Also, I'd like to go in the rest of the youth detention facilities. I mean, that'd be very, very helpful. And then, of course, I want to roll out this mobile game app to really inspire young people to get into civics and get into voting.
Auditor Anderson, some thoughts about budgeting priorities if you're elected. Would you be asking for more, trying to cut back? Talk to us.
Well, the Secretary of State's office has the biggest budget they've ever had and more FTEs than they've ever had. And
full-time employees, keep going.
Full-time employees. And maybe that's the right size and maybe that's the right budget. But one of the things I'm going to do is to leverage what we currently have for some of the outcomes that we've talked about. Let me give you one small example. The Corporations and Charitable Filing Division has over 700,000 registered businesses and charities. Conservatively, 300,000 of them have employees. I want to reach out to those corporations and legal entities and ask them to join an annual Get Out the Vote campaign. That would be a great way to reach a lot of people directly through their workplace. So that's one example of using what we have to the best effect. I will probably be approaching the state legislature about standing up a nonpartisan observer program where we work with universities and colleges to get subject matter experts like attorneys, people getting those cybersecurity certificates, et cetera, and training them and getting them involved in election observation.
Thank you for that. It is time for that closing statement. And Secretary Hobbs, you're first. Keep it to a minute, please.
This election is also about job performance. Have I done a bad job? And obviously the voters will decide, but let's look at this. I have 2 special elections that we have ran and a statewide primary. Our election is that we have done in the office, courting with 39 county auditors. We have actually pushed back on 3 misinformation campaigns and a real-world cyber threat from Russia that actually happened. We doubled our cybersecurity. We created a team that's going to combat misinformation. We also created a team that's going to go out there to underserved communities. We launched the Vote with Confidence campaign, which people want because we need to address what happens with your ballot so that we can lower this view that elections are bad in the state of Washington. I've also talked about putting out field offices out there for our corporations and nonprofits and charities so that people can actually go to a person face to face to deal with their issues. And then we talked about the libraries as well. So I hope I can earn your vote, and I would love to have an additional 2 years in this office.
Great. Auditor Anderson, last word.
Polarization is an all-time high in our country, and trust in government, unfortunately, is at an all-time low. And now is not the time to be having a Secretary of State who's an untested, inexperienced partisan politician. I offer over a decade of direct experience, have the support and trust of election administrators from all parties, and it doesn't make sense to me to have a partisan holding the office that doesn't have any experience. I have ideas for election access, increasing transparency and security, and I know that I can get the job done, and I look forward to working with community.
All right, thank you very much for this, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about the Secretary of State race? One person writes, "So grateful to elect Hobbs for calling out the misinformation and disinformation about our election system. He will fight to keep Washington the gold standard for voting, safe, secure, and accurate." Another says, "I'm supporting Julie Anderson for Washington Secretary of State because experience matters. 12 years as Pierce County Auditor, a Washington certified election administrator. Those are the qualifications we need." We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next time, we'll be back after the election for a recap of the results with our panel of top local reporters. Highlights from the campaign trail and the winners and losers right here on the next City Inside Out. I hope you join us.